Welcome, traveler. This is Moira. Today, I bring you Kaio's disturbing account, who seems to have been traumatized after trying to save too much on his new home. Good evening, Moira. We think we know Fear's limit until it changes address and walks in through the door with us. Mine came in carrying the smell of ammonia and metal. My name is Kaio, and my story begins with an apartment far too old and far too cheap. I needed to start over. Any corner that fit the tight money would do. The ad looked like a scam, but it was real. A one-bedroom in the center, a 1960s building, a good guy superintendent, low fees. The realtor looked at me over the contract and said what always comes after a price that makes no sense. Take it or leave it. I took it, of course. It was what I could manage. Apartment 405 was at the end of a long hallway, the kind that swallows sound. The floorboards were scarred, the wall peeling under fresh paint. Nothing a weekend with filler and a roller wouldn't fix. There was just one detail, the kind you register, shrug off and move on. The utility room. It looked freshly painted. White door, no window, but the doorknob was always wet and cold, as if someone had just come out holding bleach. And along the baseboard, a yellow stain reappeared every time I cleaned. I wiped, dried, mopped, and the next day, the baseboard's edge would sweat again. I called 2 masons to start the renovation. Old Naldo, 60-something, sun-browned from jobs, a smoker's voice, and Yuri, young, quiet, thin-armed, but willing. The plan was to tidy up the paint, swap some outlets, and knock down half of the utility room wall to enlarge the kitchen. That sweaty little room there, what is it? Naldo asked, testing the knob with a fingertip. Vent shaft, Reby? I guessed. He brought his nose to the baseboard and made a slight grimace. Smell of product. Old. This was sealed in a hurry. On the second day, when they began breaking the utility room's masonry, Yuri let out a dry shout. He dropped the chisel and stepped back. Under the layer of brick and plaster, there was a small metal hatch, square, with a hinge and a latch on the inside, an old trash chute door, the kind buildings did away with long ago. The metal sheet was dented from the outside in, as if someone had beaten it from within trying to open it. I stuck my hand through the gap and touched hard plastic. I pulled out a bunch of old batches with the faded logo of a company that doesn't even exist anymore. There were also hair clips, loose keys, seals from black trash bags, a packet of yellowed surgical masks, those old ones with brittle elastic. Yuri found a hairpin with a clump of hair stuck to it. Long, dark hair, dried out as if it had spent years against something chemical. He went pale. Boss, I won't mess with that. He asked for his day's pay, shoved the tool into his bucket, and left without looking back. Old Naldo stood for a while, hands on his hips, staring at the hatch. This hole eats things, Kaio. It eats things and eats sound. If I were you, I'd seal it and forget it. He said he wouldn't knock down a wall around an old chute. He got paid, wished me luck, and left. It was me and the half-open hatch in the silence of 405. I thought about calling building management. I did. The superintendent, a man who loved to begin sentences with "back in my day," answered with the serenity of someone choosing not to have a problem. That must be something from construction. Seal it again, make a nice finish, and that's that. I called the sub-prefecture. The woman on the other end seemed to recite a bureaucracy tutorial. You need to open a case, protocol, inspection. It may take a while, and meanwhile, the unit is interdicted. Interdicted. The word sent a chill that didn't come from the hatch. Interdicted meant going back to couch surfing, losing what I had, late bills. Worse than any stain on the baseboard. Late afternoon, I bought gloves, a mask, a thick black trash bag. I opened the hatch just enough to get my arm in. The smell that came out was acidic. a mix of ammonia, rust, and old disinfectant. I grabbed what I could: badge, seal, a handful of hard plastic I couldn't even identify. I tied the bag and carried it to a dumpster far away. I went back to 405 with the childish hope that this would be a full stop. The next week, I hired a crew from outside the neighborhood. 3 guys who spent the whole day mixing mortar and talking nonsense to fight the heat. The leader was Rafa, mid-20s, a good sort, with no patience for superstition. Trash chute? My uncle worked with that. Just seal it well and bye. Only the building didn't want to say bye. What they arranged by day woke up changed. The pile of rubble bags we'd left against the wall, away from the utility room, turned up aligned, one by one, set neatly against the hatch. Who touched this? I asked, irritated, thinking it was a mean joke. No one, Rafa said. I locked the door and took the key. That's when the smell began. It wasn't an animal smell. It was that chemical sourness that burns the nose, a mix of old bleach and wet rust. And it was localized. It didn't spread through the apartment, didn't take the hallway. It stood there, upright, in the hatch's crack, as if the shaft itself were breathing. To avoid losing materials overnight, I arranged with the building to have a watchman sleep at the site. Jaime, a small, quiet, older man, only asked for an outlet to charge his cell phone and a place to hang his hammock in the living room. The first 2 nights were calm. On the 3rd, he called me at dawn. His voice came low, like someone who doesn't want to wake what's nearby. Mr. Cayo, did you leave the tools organized? I did, of course. Then they're all in a line here in the kitchen, pointing at that hatch. I went early in the morning. The wrenches, the hammer, the plumb line, all lined up like a ruler, all pointing to the hatch's exact center. Jaime was sitting on the floor, his face open in a fear that needs no explanation. I won't sleep here anymore. I'm sorry. He paid with the haste of someone who wants to leave and left. That day I decided to be an adult. I called my friend Macedo, a building engineer who spends his life saving old buildings from themselves. I told half the story: unstable soil, infiltration, anything that would give him a technical reason to show up. Late afternoon, he was with me in 405's kitchen, crouched, shining his flashlight through the hatch's gap. He took a bit of black dust on his fingertip and smelled it. Not charcoal and not mold. This is residue of some product. He was going to say more when he stopped. Shh. The mute apartment suddenly gained an almost imperceptible sound, a thin scraping, like a rubber nail on metal. It came from inside the shaft, climbing. Macedo raised the flashlight slowly and aimed the beam into the dark interior. That was when we saw it. In the shaft's black dust, there were 2 handprints. They weren't smudged like ours. They were clean, perfect, with outlined fingers, the lines well defined in the dust, and they were fresh. A pair, side by side, at the height of a chest propping up to rise, and a third set a palm higher, as if that thing had pushed once, climbed a step, and vanished. There was no trace of arrival, no drag coming from below. They were 2 hands born from the middle of the wall, making an advance and disappearing into the air.
Macedo, who is anything but impressionable, swallowed hard. He swept the beam around, looking for who knows what. Footprint, fresh scratch, loose wire. Nothing. He lowered the flashlight and shook his head, a heavy no, the kind we give ourselves. Seal it today, brick mortar, a plate outside and inside. Pretend it was never opened. I tried to make a joke to see if reality would come back. And the report? He didn't laugh. No report solves anything when logic leaves the room, Kaio. This is wrong in a way I don't know how to fix. He gave me the contact of an old resident. Talk to Donna Adelia, 104. She has lived here since the building went up. If anyone knows what happened in this place, it's her. Donna Adelia received me on the balcony, sitting on a plastic chair, a floweral dress, and eyes that have seen everything. I explained it my way. The little room, the hatch, the smell, the marks. She stayed silent for a time that, in the elderly, becomes an answer. This building had a trash chute, yes, until the early 90s. The person in charge was the janitor, Romeo, a man with a bad look. She looked over my shoulder at nothing. Back then, everyone went up and down with big trash bags, without gloves, without anything. Once in a while, it clogged. And who did he send? The cleaning girls. Go down there, check it, it's quick. She pressed her fingers together, chipped nail polish scratching the air. There was one who didn't come back, Sueli. Young, rented at 301, cleaned 3 apartments. She vanished during her afternoon shift. Her boyfriend went around the building, made a scene, police came, and Romeo said she hadn't even come in that day. Days later, they painted the utility room. The entire building smelled of bleach. Sanitation, they said. Her boyfriend left town, Romeo too, out of the blue. My mouth went dry. You're sure? Sure. I have memory. The rest, in this building, we learned not to swear to. She sighed. After that, they sealed the chute. Some felt relief. Others thought the filth had only been pushed behind the wall. Security improved. The smell sometimes came back. And the cleaning ladies don't like to pass by your floor after 6. I went back home with my head throbbing. Marina, my wife, saw me from the hallway and read my face like finding a note left on the table. Bad news? She asked softly, because when we love and we're afraid, the whole voice changes. I told her everything. The little room, the bag, the guard, the hands. And then, in the middle of the living room, without work clothes, without a metal door nearby, I smelled it. That same sting of ammonia and rust. It was there, spread like an invisible veil. It didn't come from my sweaty shirt, didn't come from my hair. It was in the air of my home. Marina noticed too by the way her nose wrinkled. Kaio. That was my limit. The stubbornness that made me sign the lease without thinking became useless next to the fear of bringing that into our home. The next day, I canceled the work. I went to the realtor, tried to terminate, tried to sell. The building has a mouth, Moira, a hallway mouth. The story spread. No one wanted to buy. 405 stayed there, with the neighborhood's trash echoing in a shaft that no longer exists. I spent months without going near it. Today, almost a year later, sometimes I take the route out of habit and miss the street on purpose, and when that happens, I pass the building slowly. A bunch of closed windows, a burnt-out bulb in the hall, yellowed white tile, and always, there's a black bag leaning on the service steps alone, tied with a faded seal, as if someone had dropped it and forgotten. I don't touch it. I just think that if I touch it, the hatchet will start sweating inside me again. That was the cheapest apartment I've ever seen, and it's cost me something no one gives back, the idea that our home is a safe place.
If you live in an old building and hear light chains at night coming from where there should be nothing, close the door and let it be. Not everything locked away is empty. If this account gave you chills, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps keep the stories coming.